The atmospheric pressure of Earth felt like a heavy, wet blanket draped over Princess Kalia's shoulders. A suffocating reminder that she was light years from the crystalline spires of the Yashari Empire. She stood rigid on the landing platform of the United Earth Alliance headquarters, her ceremonial armor gleaming with the iridescence of a beetle's shell, reflecting the dull gray of the human sky. This was not a diplomatic visit. This was a sentence. Kalia's father, the Emperor, had called it a necessity. The galactic treaties were fraying, and the integration of the humans into the Greater Council required a biological and ceremonial tether. She was that tether. She, a daughter of the high blood, bred for command and combat, was to be mated to a primate. She looked down the line of dignitaries to the man standing beside the Earth General, Commander Noah Reyes. He was unimpressive. That was her first searing thought. By Yashari standards, he was diminutive. He lacked the towering height of the males of her species, who stood nearly 7 feet tall with dermal plating and eyes that burned with bioluminescence. Noah Reyes was soft. His skin was a pale, undefended beige, easily cut, easily bruised. His eyes were dark, small, and limited in spectrum, unable to see the thermal shifts of the air or the ultraviolet markers of prey. He stood at attention, his uniform pressed and pristine, but to Kalia, he looked like a child playing at war. The ceremony was a blur of primitive rituals. Hands were clasped. Vows were spoken in a language that tasted like ash in her mouth. Through it all, Noah remained silent. He did not posture. He did not bare his teeth to show dominance. He merely stood there, enduring her silence, radiating loathing with a calm that she interpreted as bovine stupidity. When the officiant declared them bonded, Noah turned to her. Up close, he smelled of artificial soap and warm blood. He offered his hand to assist her down the steps of the dais. Kalia ignored the gesture, stepping past him with a sharp click of her heels. She heard the intake of breath from the human crowd, the offense taken on their hero's behalf. But she did not care. If they expected her to feign affection for a creature she considered a political pet, they were sorely mistaken. The transport to the frontier world took 2 standard days. They spoke less than 50 words to one another at that time. The destination was Virelon IV, a chaotic, uncolonized garden world chosen for the traditional month-long conjugal retreat required by Yashari law. The bonding had to be sealed in isolation, away from the courts and the armies, to ensure the pair could survive together. It was an archaic tradition meant to weed out the weak. Kalia fully expected Noah to die there. Virelon IV greeted them with an atmospheric scream. The shuttle dropped through layers of violent purple turbulence, shaking violently enough to rattle the teeth in Kalia's skull. She sat strapped in her harness, eyes closed, regulating her heart rate through meditation. Across the aisle, Noah watched the monitors, his fingers flying across a tactile interface, adjusting the thrusters to compensate for the shear winds. They touched down in a clearing surrounded by jungle that looked like a bruise, a dense thicket of violet and black vegetation. The airlock cycled open, and the humidity hit them instantly, thick, hot, and smelling of ozone and rotting fruit. This is my prison for 30 days, Kalia thought, stepping onto the mossy ground. Noah hauled 2 large supply crates from the cargo hold, his muscles straining under the fabric of his black tactical shirt. Kalia watched him struggle for a moment with the gravity, which was 10% heavier than Earth standard. You are struggling already, she thought. She did not offer to help. Instead, she surveyed the perimeter, her hand resting on the hilt of her ceremonial blade. The weapon was a monofilament edge capable of slicing through vehicle armor, a stark contrast to the projectile weapons the humans favored. Noah set the crates down and wiped sweat from his forehead. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "The camp is secure, Princess," he said. His voice was a rough baritone, grating to her sensitive ears. "I will set up the perimeter sensors and get the shelter pressurized." Kalia sneered, a subtle flaring of her nostrils. "Do as you please, Commander. I will scout the area to ensure no actual threats are nearby. Your machines are prone to failure." Noah didn't take the bait. He simply nodded and turned back to his work. His lack of aggression infuriated her. A Yoshari male would have challenged her, snapped his jaws, and demanded her respect. Noah simply absorbed her disdain like a sponge. It was pathetic. The first week on Virelon 4 fell into a pattern that grated on Kaelia's nerves. The planet was indeed dangerous. The weather shifted without warning, dropping from sweltering heat to freezing hail in the span of 20 minutes. Gravity pockets wandered the landscape like invisible storms, crushing trees into splinters instantly, and the wildlife was nightmare fuel. Six-legged stalkers with translucent skin, birds with beaks like serrated daggers, and insects that hummed on frequencies that caused migraines. Yet, Noah seemed content to play the role of a servant. He cooked their meals using the rations and local flora he tested with a handheld scanner. He dug latrines. He maintained the fire. He reinforced the prefabricated shelter with fallen logs. He gave her a wide berth, treating her with a professional, distant courtesy that made her want to scream. Kaelia spent her days training. She found a clearing 50 meters from the camp and went through the sword forms of the Royal Guard. She moved like liquid mercury, her blade singing through the air, slicing through vines and saplings with lethal precision. She pushed her body to the limit, sweating out her frustration, proving to herself that even here, tethered to a weakling, she was strong. Occasionally, she would catch him watching her from the edge of the camp. He would stand there, a mug of coffee in his hand, eyes tracking her movement. Whenever she stopped and glared at him, he would turn away without a word, returning to his domestic chores. "He has no warrior spirit," she told herself one evening as she sharpened her blade by the fire. "He is a drone, a worker ant." Noah sat across the fire, stirring a pot of stew that smelled surprisingly savory. He looked up, catching her stare. "You push hard," he said. It was an observation, not a compliment. "I prepared," Kaelia corrected him sharply. "This world is hostile. One of us must be ready to defend this camp when the local fauna decides to test us. I have the perimeter rigged with motion trackers and shock mines," Noah said quietly. "Nothing gets within 300 meters without me knowing." Kaelia laughed, a harsh barking sound. "You trust your toys too much, human. A true predator knows how to move without triggering sensors. A true predator hunts with instinct, not algorithms." Noah shrugged, spooning the stew into a metal bowl and offering it to her. "Perhaps. But the toys allow me to sleep for more than 2 hours at a time. Eat. You need the calories." She took the bowl, careful not to brush his fingers. The stew was hot and rich, but she ate it without expression, refusing to give him the satisfaction of knowing he provided for her. The shift happened on day 9. Kaelia was exploring a ridgeline 1/2 mile from camp, investigating a strange thermal signature she had spotted with her visor. She moved through the dense underbrush, pushing aside broad, wet leaves the size of shields. She stepped over a fallen log, her eyes scanning the canopy, and failed to notice the symbiotic moss growing on the bark. As her boot made contact, the moss reacted to the pressure. It triggered a defense mechanism, firing a cloud of microscopic acidic spores upward. Kaelia hissed as the spores struck her exposed thigh, just above the knee guard of her armor. The pain was immediate and blinding, like 1,000 hot needles piercing her skin. She stumbled back, slapping at her leg, but the chemical burn was already setting in. The flesh turned an angry, blistering red. She gritted her teeth, refusing to cry out, and limped back toward the camp. By the time she broke through the tree line, her leg was throbbing with a pulse that made her vision swim. Noah was chopping wood. He stopped mid-swing as she entered the clearing, his eyes immediately locking onto her uneven gait. He dropped the axe and was at her side in 3 strides. "Sit," he ordered. The difference was gone. His voice was a command. "I am fine," Kalia snapped, though she leaned heavily against a supply crate. "It is merely a plant sting." "Sit down, Kalia." He gripped her arm, firmly but not painfully, and guided her to the folding medical cot near the fire. She was too pained to resist. He knelt before her, his hands moving with a speed she hadn't expected. He deactivated the magnetic seals on her leg armor and slid the plating away, exposing the angry, weeping burn on her pale violet skin. Noah hissed through his teeth, "Neurotoxin. This needs to be neutralized now." He reached for his medical kit, pulling out a gel canister and a bioscanner. Kalia watched him, ready to criticize his clumsiness. But there was none. His hands were steady, his fingers calloused and scarred, moved with a surgeon's precision. He applied a cooling agent that numbed the surface pain, then brought out a specialized extraction tool. "This will hurt," he said, looking up at her. His dark eyes were serious, focused entirely on her well-being. "Do it," she said through clenched teeth. He activated the device. It pulled the toxins from the deeper tissue. Kalia gripped the edges of the cot, her knuckles turning white, a low growl vibrating in her chest. It felt as though he were pulling a hook through her muscle. And then it was over. Noah applied a synthetic skin patch and wrapped the wound. He stayed kneeling for a moment, his hand resting on her shin, checking the seal of the bandage. The pain began to recede, replaced by a dull, throbbing heat. Kalia looked down at him. He was close. Too close. She could see the gray flecks in his stubble, the small scar above his left eyebrow. She could feel the heat radiating from his body. It was a mammal's heat, constant and burning. For a moment, neither of them moved. His hand remained on her leg, his thumb tracing a subconscious circle on her skin just below the bandage. The contact sent a strange jolt through her nervous system, alien and unsettling. Her breathing hitched, the sound loud in the quiet clearing. Noah froze. He seemed to realize where his hand was. He looked up, and their gazes locked. There was no mockery in his eyes now. There was something else, a depth, a darkness that she hadn't seen before. For a second, the soldier peeked out from behind the servant. He pulled his hand away slowly, breaking the connection. "Keep weight off it for 12 hours, he said, his voice rougher than before. He stood up and turned his back to her, moving quickly toward the water filtration unit. Kalia sat there, her skin tingling where he had touched her, confused by the sudden spike in her heart rate. It was the adrenaline from the pain, she told herself. It was nothing more. 2 nights later, the feeling of being watched returned. It was a subtle shift in the jungle's rhythm. The chirping of the nocturnal insects would cease abruptly, leaving a vacuum of silence, before slowly resuming. Kalia sat by the dying fire, her senses extended to their limit. She could smell the ozone of the coming storm, the damp earth, the metallic tang of the perimeter fence. But underneath it all, there was a scent she couldn't place, musky, dry, ancient. She stood up, her hand going to her blade. Noah was inside the shelter, calibrating the comms array. He had his back to the door. "We are not alone," Kalia said, her voice low. Noah didn't turn. "It's just the wind. Kalia, the sensors are clear." "Your sensors are blind," she spat. "Something is out there." She moved to the edge of the light, peering into the wall of darkness. The shadows seemed to writhe. She focused her eyes, shifting her vision into the thermal spectrum. The jungle washed out in blues and greens, heat signatures glowing in orange. There was nothing. She swept her gaze left, then right. Nothing but the passive heat of the vegetation. But the feeling persisted. The hair on the back of her neck stood up. She knew the feeling of being hunted. She had hunted and been hunted on the royal preserve since she was a child. She returned to the fire, frustrated. "Did you find your ghost?" Noah asked from the doorway. He was leaning against the frame, arms crossed. "Do not mock me, human," she warned. "Your reliance on machines makes you deaf to the world. There is a predator out there. It is watching us. If it's there, it's smart," Noah said. He looked out into the dark, and for a fleeting second, Kalia thought she saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes, as if he sensed it too. But then he shrugged. "Get some sleep. If it crosses the line, the mines will turn it into mist." The dismissal was the spark that finally lit the powder keg of her resentment. She marched up to him, stopping inches from his chest. She had to look down slightly to meet his eyes, and she used the height difference to project every ounce of her royal superiority. "Is that your solution to everything?" she demanded. "Hide behind a wall? Let a machine do the killing for you? You humans are so incredibly fragile. You have no claws, no armor, no instincts. You are soft meat wrapped in cloth." Noah's expression tightened. "Go to sleep, Kalia." "Do not command me," she shouted. "Why did they send you? Of all the soldiers in your alliance, why you? You are passive. You are weak. You act more like a servant drone than a warrior. My father insulted me by binding me to you. He married me to a gardener." Noah went very still. The air around them seemed to drop in temperature. He looked at her, really looked at her, and the mask of indifference slipped just a fraction. "I am here because I was ordered to be here," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Just like you." "I am here to secure a treaty," she countered. "You are here because you are expendable. Because when this planet inevitably kills you, your government can replace you with another faceless clone without losing anything of value." It was a cruel thing to say. She knew it was cruel, and she wanted to see him hurt. She wanted to see him rage. She wanted him to prove her right by losing control. But Noah didn't scream. He didn't strike her. He stared at her for a long beat, his jaw working silently. Then, he simply stepped around her. He walked past the fire, past the perimeter markers, and into the darkness of the tree line. Kalia stood alone in the camp, her chest heaving. She waited for him to come back. He didn't. Minutes turned into an hour. The guilt, an emotion she detested, began to gnaw at her. She had wanted a reaction, but his silent departure felt like a rebuke she hadn't anticipated. She checked her blade and followed him. She found him 100 yards away, in a small clearing where the canopy broke to reveal the alien stars. The twin moons of Virulent-Fomorve cast a silver light over the stone outcrop where he knelt. Kalia approached silently, her steps making no sound on the moss. She intended to drag him back, to finish the argument, but the scene before her stopped her cold. Noah was on his knees. His head was bowed, his hands clasped together in front of his chest. He was whispering, "It'll grant me the strength to restrain the darkness. Keep my mind clear. Keep my hands steady. Do not let the old ways return. Protect her, even from me. Amen." Kalia frowned, tilting her head. She knew of human religion, of course, but to see a soldier begging an invisible deity for strength was baffling. The Yashari did not pray for strength. They took it. They did not ask for protection, they built it. To see him so exposed, admitting his own fragility to the empty air, confirmed everything she thought of him. He was terrified. He was holding on by a thread. And yet, the tone of his voice wasn't fearful. It was rigid, controlled, like a man holding a heavy door shut against a hurricane. Thunder rumbled overhead, a low, guttural growl that shook the ground. The storm finally broke. Rain began to fall, fat, heavy drops that were warm to the touch. It escalated quickly into a deluge, hammering the leaves and soaking the ground instantly. Noah stood up. He didn't look surprised to see her standing there. He turned, water streaming down his face, plastering his dark hair to his skull. His shirt clung to him, revealing the definition of the muscles underneath. Not the bulky, plated muscle of her kind, but wiry, dense, efficient, corded strength. "You shouldn't be out here," he said. His voice was barely audible over the rain. "You are praying," she accused, shouting to be heard. "You beg the sky for help because you cannot help yourself." Noah walked toward her. He didn't stop until he was within arm's reach. The rain soaked them both, washing away the humidity, leaving them shivering and raw. "I don't pray for help, Kalia." "Then what?" she challenged, looking down at him, water dripping from her chin. "I pray for patience." The words hung between them. Kalia blinked, unsure how to interpret that. Patience with what? With the planet? With her? The lightning flashed, stark white, illuminating his face. For the first time, she saw the exhaustion etched there, not physical tiredness, but a deep, soul-weary heaviness. "You think you know what I am," Noah said. "You look at me and you see a target. You see prey." "I see what is there," she said, though her voice lacked its usual bite. "You see what I let you see." He stepped closer. The sexual tension that had flickered during the healing session flared up again, violent and sudden. It wasn't romantic. It was the tension of two volatile chemicals mixing in a beaker. Kalia's breath hitched. She should push him away. She should strike him for his insolence. But she didn't. She stood her ground, her eyes searching for him. "You are a puzzle, human," she whispered, "and I hate puzzles." Noah looked at her lips, then up to her eyes. The rain ran down his face like tears. "Good," he murmured. He moved before she could react. His hand came up, cupping the back of her neck, his thumb resting on the sensitive pulse point of her throat. It was a dominant gesture, possessive. He pulled her down and kissed her. It wasn't a tentative, diplomatic kiss. It was hard. It tasted of rain and repressed anger. His lips were warm, demanding a response. Kalia stiffened for a fraction of a second, shocked by the audacity. But then her body betrayed her. Her hands came up, grabbing the wet fabric of his shirt, pulling him closer. She opened her mouth, tasting him, feeling the rough texture of his tongue against hers. For 5 seconds, the world narrowed down to the friction of their bodies and the sound of the rain. Then they broke apart. They stumbled back from each other as if repelled by a magnetic force. Kalia's chest was heaving, her eyes wide, her lips tingling. Noah looked equally shaken. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, staring at her with a mixture of hunger and regret. "We should go back," he said, his voice hoarse. "The storm is getting worse." He turned and walked back toward the camp without waiting for her. Kalia stood in the rain for a long moment, touching her lips, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She looked at his retreating back, confused, angry, and terrified by the realization that for those 5 seconds, she hadn't been thinking about the Empire or her father or the treaty. She had just wanted him not to stop. She clenched her fists and followed him into the dark. The creature in the jungle watched them go, its cloaked form shifting seamlessly with the swaying branches, waiting for the right moment to strike. The tempest that descended upon Virelon-Fort was not merely a weather event. It was a planetary convulsion. The sky, previously a bruised purple, turned a violent, churning black as the atmospheric pressure dropped so sharply it made the ears pop. The wind did not howl. It screamed, a high-pitched mechanical shriek that tore through the jungle canopy, snapping trees that had stood for centuries and hurling them through the air like toothpicks. Inside the prefabricated shelter, the world had shrunk to a 10 by 10 meter box of flickering emergency lights and the smell of recirculated air turning stale. The storm had hit 3 hours ago, and the ferocity of it had forced the structural integrity field to maximum output. The generator hummed aggressively, fighting to keep the violent winds from shredding their sanctuary. Kalia sat on the edge of her bunk, her knees drawn up to her chest. She had stripped off the heavy ceremonial armor, leaving only the form-fitting thermal undersuit that clung to her body like a second skin. It was a dark, matte fabric designed to regulate body temperature, but in the stifling humidity of the sealed shelter, it felt suffocating. The climate control unit had malfunctioned an hour into the storm, clogged by the sudden intake of spore-heavy dust, and the temperature inside was steadily climbing. She watched Noah. He was standing on a crate near the ceiling vent, his back to her. He had removed his tactical shirt, revealing a back that was a map of violence. Kalia had seen scars before. Her own people wore them as badges of honor. But Noah's were different. They were not the clean slices of a duel or the jagged tears of a beast. They were surgical. Lines of silver-white tissue ran along his spine, flanked by circular burn marks that looked like ports for interface cables, long since removed. His skin was slick with sweat, the moisture gathering in the valleys of his spine and running down to the waistband of his cargo trousers. He was working to seal a micro-fracture in the roof seal where water was beginning to hiss through. Every time the thunder hammered the ground, the shelter vibrated, and Noah's muscles coiled and released with hypnotic rhythm as he applied sealant paste to the breach. Kalia felt a strange, agitated heat in her blood that had nothing to do with the broken air conditioner. Being trapped in this box with him, smelling his sweat, watching the play of his muscles, it was maddening. She wanted to fight him. She wanted to break the suffocating silence that had stretched between them since the kiss in the rain. He is just a mechanic, she told herself, watching his triceps flex as he wrenched a bolt tight. A laborer. Noah wiped his forearm across his forehead and climbed down from the crate. He checked the readout on the wall, tapping the screen with a grease-stained finger. "The seal will hold," he said, his voice low, barely cutting through the roar of the wind outside. "But we are stuck here until the cell passes. Another 4 hours, minimum." Kalia uncoiled her legs and stood up, needing to move. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of him, musk, salt, and the metallic tang of the sealant. 4 hours, she repeated, pacing the small length of the room. 4 hours in a cage with a man who prays to the rain. Noah ignored the jab. He walked to the hydration unit, poured a cup of water, and downed it in one long swallow. He didn't offer her any, knowing she would refuse it out of spite. He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms over his bare chest, and watched her pace. "Why do you hate silence so much, Kalia?" he asked. "I do not hate silence," she snapped, turning to face him. "I hate stagnation. I am a warrior of the Yashari. We are meant to be in motion, not cowering in a box while the sky falls." "It's just a storm," Noah said calmly. "It passes. Everything passes." His calmness was the spark that lit the fuse. Kalia stopped pacing and stalked toward him, her eyes narrowing. She looked at the scars on his chest now. There was a long, jagged line running from his collarbone to his navel, an old, ugly thing that looked like an autopsy incision that had healed wrong. "You speak like a man who has spent his life waiting," she said, gesturing vaguely at him. "Passive, enduring. Look at you. Your body is a ruin of old wounds. Did you receive these while hiding in a bunker? Noah looked down at his own chest, as if noticing the scars for the first time. He ran a thumb over the jagged line. No, he said, I got this one when I was 12. Kalia paused. 12. The Reclamation Wars, Noah said simply. He looked up, his eyes dark and distant. My colony was one of the first breached by the Krell. They didn't take prisoners. They took resources, biological ones. Kalia went still. She knew of the Krell. They were a scavenger species reviled by the Council for their brutality. They used other species as raw material for their bioorganic machines. You were a child, she said, the scorn draining out of her voice replaced by a cold curiosity. I was a candidate, Noah corrected. The Earth Alliance was desperate. They needed soldiers who could survive in high radiation zones, who could move faster than Krell hunters. They took the survivors from the colony, children who had nothing left, and they adjusted us. He tapped the circular scars on his shoulder. Myosostatin inhibitors, adrenal regulators, neural dampeners to suppress fear responses. They stripped us down and rebuilt us as weapons. I spent 6 years in a containment suit, dropping into war zones that no adult Marine could survive. Kalia stared at him. The soft, unimpressive human she had mocked was standing there, admitting he was a biological construct designed for slaughter. It explained the density of his muscles, the unnatural stillness she had mistaken for slowness. But you are tame, she whispered. You cook, you clean, you pray. A weapon does not pray. Noah's jaw tightened. A muscle feathered in his cheek. The war ended. Kalia. The Alliance won. And then they had thousands of us left over, living weapons with no war to fight. Most of my unit went insane. The aggression inhibitors failed, or the trauma caught up with them. They became monsters. He pushed off the counter, walking slowly toward her. I didn't want to be a monster, so I learned to suppress it. The programming is still there, underneath. Every time you insult me, every time I feel a threat, my brain screams at me to tear the threat apart, to kill it before it kills me. He stopped a foot away from her. The heat coming off him was palpable. I cook, and I clean, and I pray, because the alternative is letting the ghost in the machine take over. I am not weak, Princess. I am the only thing standing between you and the violence I keep locked in a cage. Kalia felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. She looked up at him, searching for the lie, but there was none. He was telling the truth. The softness she despised was a deliberate, exhausting effort of will. He was a leashed tiger pretending to be a house cat. She felt foolish. And because she felt foolish, she became defensive. She needed to regain the high ground. So you are a broken toy, she said, though her voice lacked its usual conviction. You are a failed experiment trying to pretend you have a soul. It is pathetic. You humans try so hard to elevate yourselves with your little stories and your primitive culture. But in the end, you are just meat and chemistry. She laughed. A brittle sound. I looked through your data slate, your poetry. It is distinctively primitive, rhyming words about flowers and death. It is the scrawl of children trying to understand the dark. Noah stared at her. For a moment, she thought the leash would snap. She saw his pupils dilate, swallowing the iris. But then he took a long, slow breath. The tension in his shoulders dropped an inch. He didn't shout. He didn't argue. He simply looked past her at the rain lashing against the reinforced window. Though much is taken, much abides, he recited, his voice dropping to a register that vibrated in her chest. And though we are not now that strength which in old days moved earth and heaven, that which we are, We are. Kalia opened her mouth to interrupt, to mock him, but the words stuck in her throat. The cadence of his voice had changed. It wasn't the soldier speaking, nor the servant. It was something ancient, one equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. The silence that followed was absolute. Kalia felt a stinging sensation in her eyes. She blinked, confused. A single tear, hot and traitorous, spilled over her lash line and tracked down her cheek. She reached up and touched it, staring at the moisture on her fingertip in horror. Why was she crying? The words were simple. They were meaningless human gibberish, but they had struck a chord deep inside her, a vibration that resonated with the loneliness of her own position, the weight of her crown, the crushing expectation to be strong, to never yield, even when she was breaking. You, she started, her voice trembling. You have no right to use those words. Noah looked back at her. He saw the tear. His expression softened, the hardness of the soldier melting away to reveal a profound, aching sadness. He reached out. This time, she didn't flinch. He brushed the tear away with the rough pad of his thumb. His hand was hot against her cool skin. We are both just trying to survive, Kaelia, he whispered. The touch was the catalyst. The storm outside, the heat inside, the revelation of his violence, the vulnerability of the poetry, it all crashed together in a wave that swept away her logic. She didn't think so. She acted on instinct. She grabbed his wrist, turning her face into his palm, inhaling the scent of him. Then she lunged forward, crashing her mouth against his. It was not like the kiss in the rain. That had been a question. This was an answer. Noah groaned, a low, guttural sound, and his restraint finally snapped. He didn't push her away. He wrapped his arms around her waist, lifting her effortlessly off the floor, pulling her body flush against his. They moved blindly, stumbling toward the narrow bunk. Kaelia's hands were in his hair, pulling, scratching, desperate to get closer. She needed to understand him. She needed to consume him. When they fell onto the mattress, it was a tangle of limbs and heated skin. The undersuit peeled away. The sensation of skin on skin was electric. As they joined, Kaelia gasped, her back arching. It was not just physical sensation. The Yashari were a mildly telepathic species, sensitive to the emotional resonance of those they bonded with. She had expected Noah's mind to be dull, a static buzz of simple human thoughts. She was wrong. His mind was a storm. As they moved together, slow and intense, she was flooded with a torrent of his emotions. She felt the cold, jagged iron of his discipline. She felt the screaming red rage of the bio-programming he held back. But underneath it all, she felt a golden, burning warmth. It was a profound loneliness, a desperate need to protect, and a shocking, overwhelming reverence for her. He didn't see her as a political burden. He saw her as something precious, something terrifyingly beautiful. The psychic feedback loop intensified the physical pleasure until it was unbearable. Kaelia cried out, her nails digging into his scarred shoulders, her mind merging with his in a way she had never experienced with her own kind. Her people were cold, transactional lovers. Noah was fired. He gave everything. He held nothing back. When the release came, it shattered her. She lay gasping, her forehead resting against his slick chest, her heart hammering in sync with his. The room was silent again, save for the ragged sound of their breathing and the dying wind outside. For a long time, neither of them moved. Kaelia floated in the afterglow, feeling the fading echoes of his emotions in her mind. Then, the logic returned. The cold, sharp walls of her training slammed back into place. She sat up abruptly, pushing herself away from him. She scrambled to the end of the bunk, grabbing her undersuit to cover herself. Her face flushed with a mixture of shame and fury. "What did you do?" she hissed. Noah blinked, propping himself up on one elbow. He looked dazed, his eyes heavy and soft. "What? You used something," she accused, her voice rising. "That was not natural. I felt you were in my head. You used some human chemical trick to manipulate me." Noah sat up, the softness vanishing instantly. He ran a hand through his hair, looking weary. "Kalia, that wasn't a trick. That was us. Do not lie to me," she shouted, standing up and backing away as if he were a contagion. "You played on my weakness. You used your sad story and your stolen poetry to lower my guard, and then you compromised me. It is a tactic, a psychological operation. Kalia, stop. I am a princess of the Yashari Empire. I do not mate with lab experiments." The words hung in the air, ugly and irredeemable. Noah went very still. He looked at her, and the light in his eyes, the golden warmth she had felt moments ago, flickered and died. The shutters came down. The face of the commander returned, blank, professional, distant. He stood up and pulled on his trousers. He didn't look at her. He picked up his shirt and walked to the airlock door. "Where are you going?" she demanded, hate and panic warring in her chest. "The storm is not over." "It's past the peak," Noah said. His voice was devoid of emotion. "I need to check the perimeter." He cycled the airlock and stepped out into the wind and rain, leaving her alone in the shelter. Kalia stood there, shivering, clutching her clothes to her chest. She waited for the triumph of having put him in his place. It didn't come. Instead, she felt a hollow, aching sickness in her stomach. She looked at the indentation his body had left on the bunk, and for the first time in her life, she felt truly, terrifyingly alone. She eventually collapsed onto the bed, exhausted by the emotional whiplash. Sleep took her quickly, but it was not a peaceful sleep. The dream was vivid, high definition, and terrifying. She was back in the Imperial Palace on the homeworld. The halls were dark, the bioluminescent moss on the walls dying, turning a sickly gray. She was walking toward the throne room. She could hear voices, whispers that sounded like snakes sliding over dry leaves. She pushed open the heavy doors. Her father, the Emperor, sat on the obsidian throne. But he was not alone. Figures in shadow surrounded him. They were Yashari, high nobles by the shape of their crests. But their faces were blurred. One of them stepped forward. He held a dagger that dripped with a green viscous liquid. "For the purity of the blood," the figure whispered. Her father looked up. He looked directly at Kalia. His eyes were full of sorrow. "Kalia," he mouthed. "Run." The dagger fell. Kalia screamed, but no sound came out. The shadows turned toward her, their eyes glowing red. They began to laugh, and the laughter sounded like the mechanical shriek of the storm on Virelon 4. She woke with a gasp, sitting bolt upright in the dark shelter. The emergency lights had dimmed to a low amber pulse. The storm had passed. The silence outside was absolute. Kalia pressed her hands to her face, wiping away the cold sweat. Her heart was racing. The image of her father dying was burned into her retinas. It felt real. Too real. A sound cut through the silence. It was a scrape, metal on metal. Kalia froze. Her warrior training overrode her fear instantly. She reached for her blade, which she had left on the supply crate, but she was on the bunk, 5 meters away. The sound came from the roof. Something heavy was moving across the reinforced polymer. "Noah," she whispered. There was no answer, just the slow, deliberate sound of claws testing the integrity of the seals. Kalia slid off the bunk, moving silently toward her weapon. She was halfway across the room when the roof vent, the one Noah had repaired, exploded inward. It wasn't the wind. A nightmare dropped into the room. It was the creature she had sensed in the jungle. But seeing it in the amber light of the shelter was a horror beyond imagination. It was massive, a crouching quadruped with skin that shifted colors, rippling to match the metal floor. It had 6 eyes arranged in a semicircle, glowing with a malevolent intelligence, and a mouth that unhinged to reveal rows of translucent, needle-like teeth. It hissed, a sound like steam escaping a valve, and turned its head toward her. Kalia lunged for her sword. The creature was faster. It moved with a blurring speed, swiping a massive clawed limb. The impact caught Kalia in the chest, throwing her backward. She slammed into the wall, the breath driven from her lungs. Pain exploded in her ribs. The creature stalked toward her, drool dripping from its jaws, melting the floor plating where it landed. It was an apex predator, playing with its food. Kalia struggled to rise, gasping for air, her vision swimming. She raised her hands, preparing to fight with nothing but her fingernails. The airlock door hissed open. Noah stood there. He was soaked to the bone, mud streaked across his bare chest. He took in the scene in a microsecond. The creature, Kalia, is trapped against the wall. He didn't yell. He didn't hesitate. Noah raised the standard-issue shock pistol in his hand and fired. The blue bolt of ionized energy struck the creature in the flank. It roared, a sound that shook the walls and whipped around to face the new threat. The shock round didn't kill it. The beast's hide was too thick, but it enraged it. The creature launched itself at Noah. Noah didn't retreat. He dropped into a combat stance, firing 2 more shots into the creature's face, blinding 2 of its eyes. The beast crashed into him, the momentum carrying them both out the open airlock and into the muddy clearing outside. "Noah!" Kalia screamed, forcing herself up. She stumbled to the door, grabbing her sword from the crate as she passed. Outside, the mud was slick and deep. Noah was rolling, the creature on top of him. The beast's claws were tearing at the ground, trying to pin him, snapping its jaws inches from his throat. Noah was fighting with a savage, desperate intensity, using the pistol as a club now, smashing it against the creature's sensitive snout. He kicked upward, his heavy boot connecting with the creature's throat. The beast gagged and reared back. Noah scrambled to his feet, but he wasn't fast enough. The creature swiped again. The claws caught Noah across the left forearm. Blood sprayed dark and hot in the moonlight. Noah grunted, dropping the pistol. He didn't look at the wound. He grabbed a heavy entrenching tool from the supply pile near the door and swung it two-handed. The metal spade struck the creature's shoulder, cracking the chitinous armor. The beast shrieked and backed away, chattering its teeth. It realized this prey was not soft. It realized the element of surprise was gone. With a final hateful hiss, the creature turned and vanished into the dense, dark jungle, its camouflage rendering it invisible within seconds. Noah stood in the mud, chest heaving, the shovel raised high. He waited 10 seconds, 20. Only when he was sure the predator was gone did he lower the weapon. Kalia ran to him. "Noah!" He turned to her. He looked wrecked. His face was pale, rain mixing with the mud on his skin. His left arm was a ruin, 3 deep gashes running from elbow to wrist, bleeding freely. But he didn't look at his arm. He grabbed her shoulders with his good hand, his grip bruising. "Did it touch you?" he demanded. His voice was raw, frantic. "Kalia, are you hurt?" I am fine," she stammered, shocked by the intensity of his gaze. "It just threw me." "But you..." He let out a breath that was half sob, half laugh. He slumped, the adrenaline crash hitting him all at once. His legs buckled. Kalia caught him. She took his weight, which was substantial, and half dragged him back into the shelter. She forced him onto the bunk, the same bunk where they had made love hours ago. now a triage station. She worked quickly, falling back on her field medical training. She cleaned the wound on his arm. It was deep. It would leave a scar to match the others. Noah watched her, his eyes glassy but focused entirely on her face. He hissed when she applied the cauterizing foam. "You idiot," she whispered, her hands shaking slightly as she wrapped the bandage. "You attacked a stalker with a shock pistol. You could have been killed." "It was going to kill you," he said. It was a statement of fact. No hesitation. Kalia looked up at him. The anger she had felt earlier, the pride, the suspicion, it all felt distant now. She saw the way he looked at her. There was fear in his eyes, genuine, terrifying fear. But it wasn't for himself. He was bleeding, in shock, and completely unconcerned with his own mortality. He was terrified that he had almost failed to protect her. He is not weak, she thought, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. He is not passive. He is a wall, and he just threw himself in front of a monster for me. She finished the bandage. She should go to her own bunk. She should put distance between them. Instead, she lay down beside him. The bunk was narrow. She pressed her back against the wall, giving him space, but she reached out and took his hand, the blood-stained one, the one that had held the weapon. Noah didn't pull away. He squeezed her fingers, his grip weak but constant. "Go to sleep, Noah," she whispered. He didn't answer. His breathing had already evened out as exhaustion claimed him. Kalia lay awake, listening to the jungle outside. She felt the warmth of his hand, the rough calluses against her palm. She was confused. She was torn between her duty to her empire and the undeniable magnetic pull of the human beside her. But as she closed her eyes, one thing was clear. One thing was, she was no longer alone in the dark, and for the first time since arriving on Earth, she felt safe. The jungle of Virelon-Fouforp did not sleep, but it did breathe. The inhalation was the rising heat of the morning, drawing moisture from the black soil, and the exhalation was the settling mist of the evening, heavy with the scent of decaying orchids and ozone. Princess Kalia moved through the underbrush with a silence that would have made her ancestors proud. In the 3 days since the storm, the dynamic of their survival had inverted. Commander Noah Reyes, the man she had dismissed as a soft, fragile political accessory, was now the invalid. The infection in his arm, despite his advanced field dressing, had triggered a systemic fever response. His genetic enhancements were fighting the alien bacteria, burning through his caloric reserves at a terrifying rate. He could barely stand without swaying. So Kalia hunted. She tracked a herd of 6-legged grazers to a watering hole 2 miles east of their camp. She moved low, her ceremonial blade replaced by a spear she had fashioned from a hardwood sapling and shards of titanium from the shuttle wreckage. She was no longer the diplomat in pristine armor. She was mud-streaked, her hair bound back in a severe knot, her eyes scanning the spectrums for heat signatures. She found the grazers, but she found something else first. Embedded in the bark of a towering ironwood tree, roughly 7 feet off the ground, was a glint of unnatural metal. Kalia froze. She shifted her vision, zooming in on the object. It was small, no larger than a human thumb, shaped like a scarab beetle. It blended almost perfectly with the dark moss, but the heat signature gave it away. It was running hot, processing data. She approached it slowly, checking for tripwires, finding none. She used the tip of her knife to pry it loose. The device fell into her palm. It was heavy. She turned it over and her blood ran cold. The circuitry on the underside was not human. It was not the crude, blocky silicone of the Earth Alliance. It was crystalline, elegant. It was Yashari, a spy drone. And not just any drone. This was a Whisper-class surveillance unit, used exclusively by the Imperial Intelligence Directorate. Someone was not just watching them, they were tracking them. And since this was Yashari technology, it meant the threat was not the local wildlife. It was her own people. Kalia crushed the device in her fist, the circuitry crunching satisfyingly, and turned back toward the camp. The hunt was forgotten. She needed answers, and the only person who might have them was currently shivering in a fever dream. When she returned to the clearing, Noah was awake, sitting by the fire pit. He was trying to clean his weapon. The disassembled pieces of his shock rifle spread out on a cloth, but his hands were shaking. He looked pale, the gray in his stubble standing out starkly against his ashen skin. Kalia dropped the crushed drone onto the cloth, right on top of the rifle barrel. Noah looked at it. He didn't look surprised. He picked up the fragments, turning them over in his good hand. "Found one, did you?" he rasped. His voice was wrecked, sounding like gravel grinding together. "You knew," Kalia accused. She stood over him, her shadow falling across his face. "I suspected," Noah corrected. He set the pieces down and resumed cleaning the firing pin. There was a signal echo on the comms array before the storm, too organized to be atmospheric interference. "Why is there an Imperial listening device on this planet?" Kalia demanded. "This is a sanctioned honeymoon, a diplomatic ritual. We are supposed to be isolated." Noah didn't answer immediately. He slotted the pin back into the receiver with a mechanical click. "Kalia, there are things about this mission you do not understand." "Then explain them to me." "Human," she shouted, her patience snapping. Noah sighed, a long rattling sound. He looked up at her, and the fatigue in his eyes was profound. "Not now. I need to finish this. If that stalker comes back, I do not care about the beast, I care about the betrayal." She kicked the crate he was sitting on. It was a petulant, angry move, but it got his attention. He flinched, pain flashing across his face as the movement jarred his wounded arm. Kalia felt a spike of guilt, but she buried it under her anger. She grabbed his datapad from the supply stack. It was a military-grade tablet, locked with biometric encryption. "Open it," she ordered, holding it out to him. Noah stared at the device. "No." "Open it." "Noah, you have a classified file on this drive. I saw the header when you were checking the maps. Operation Silent Star. I want to know what it is." Noah stood up slowly, swaying on his feet. He was a head shorter than her, injured and feverish. But for a moment, the ghost of the soldier flickered back into existence. "That information is sealed for your protection," he said softly. "My protection." Kalia laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You claim to protect me, yet you drag me to a death world where my own people are spying on me? Open the file, or I will assume you are part of the trap." Noah looked at her, his jaw working. He weighed the options. He looked at the determination in her eyes, the set of her shoulders. He knew she wouldn't stop. She would tear the camp apart, tear him apart, to get the truth. He reached out and pressed his thumb against the scanner. The pad beeped. The screen flashed green. He handed it to her and sat back down, looking defeated. Kalia scrolled through the documents. The text was in English, but her translator implant converted it instantly. She read the mission summary, then the personnel manifest, then the operational log. Her breath caught in her throat. The world tilted on its axis. She looked up at him, horror dawning on her face. "You," she whispered. Noah didn't look at her. He stared at the fire. "You were the team leader," she said, her voice rising in disbelief. 5 years ago, the assassination of High Lord Varric on the colony moon of Typhon. That was you." Noah nodded once. "Varric was a hero," Kalia screamed. "He was a stabilizer of the Outer Rim. He was my father's oldest friend. He was selling chemical weapons to the separatists." Noah said, His voice was flat, devoid of apology. He was planning to gas 3 human colonies to provoke a war. We stopped him. You murdered him in his sleep. We neutralized a threat. Kalia threw the data pad at him. It struck his chest and clattered to the ground. You are a monster, she hissed, backing away. A butcher. And my father. He married me to you? To the man who killed his friend? Noah stood up again. This time, he ignored the pain. He stepped over the fire, closing the distance between them. Your father knows Kalia. The words stopped her dead. She froze. What? Your father sanctioned the mission, Noah said. He couldn't act against Varric publicly without starting a civil war. So he called the Alliance. He called me. Kalia shook her head. No, that is a lie. It is the truth, and that is why we are here. He grabbed her shoulders. She tried to shrug him off, but his grip was iron. Look at me, he barked. She stopped struggling, staring into his dark, intense eyes. Varric's faction didn't die with him, Noah said, speaking rapidly. They have been hunting for the leak. They found out your father authorized the hit. They can't kill the Emperor. He is too well guarded. But they can kill his heir. They can kill you. Kalia felt the blood drain from her face. The marriage, Noah continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. The treaty. It's all a cover. Your father needed to get you off-world. He needed to put you somewhere no one would look, with a guardian no one would suspect. He chose the one human who has successfully killed a High Lord. He chose me because I am the only thing in this galaxy that the Varric faction fears. Kalia stared at him. The pieces fell into place with a sickening click. The hasty ceremony. Her father's distant, sorrowful farewell. The choice of this remote, deadly planet. I am not a bride, she whispered, her voice trembling. I am a package, and you are not a husband. You are a storage locker. I am your shield, Noah said fiercely. You lied to me, she screamed, the betrayal burning hotter than the truth. You let me treat you like a servant. You let me mock you. You watched me humiliate myself while you held all the cards. I did what I had to do to keep you safe. Safe? Kalia laughed, and it sounded like a sob. We are being hunted by a monster in the jungle and spied on by assassins in the trees. I am not safe. I am bait. She swung her hand, a reflex of pure, blinding rage. Her palm connected with his cheek with a crack that echoed through the clearing. It was a blow meant to hurt, fueled by her superior strength. Noah's head snapped to the side. He stumbled back, tasting blood. He didn't retreat this time. The leash snapped. He turned back to her, his eyes black pits of aggression. He didn't hit her. He lunged. He grabbed her wrist before she could strike again. His grip was bruising, shockingly strong for a man who was burning with fever. He yanked her toward him, spinning her around and slamming her back against the rough bark of the nearest tree. Let go of me, she snarled, baring her teeth. Make me, he growled. It wasn't a challenge of combat, and it was something else. The air between them, already thick with humidity and anger, ignited. Kalia struggled, pushing against his chest. She was stronger than him, physically. She could break his ribs if she exerted full force, but she didn't. She felt the heat radiating off him, the raw, unadulterated power of his will crashing against hers. She looked at his face. The blood from his split lip made him look feral. You want to fight, Noah whispered, leaning in close, his body pressing hers against the wood. You want to see the monster? Here I am. Kalia stopped fighting. Her breath hitched. The anger didn't vanish, it transmuted, it turned into a dark, heavy hunger. She saw the predator in him now, the one she had accused him of lacking. It terrified her, and it aroused her in a way that made her knees weak. She grabbed the back of his neck, her fingers digging into his hair. Show me, She dared him. He kissed her. It was nothing like the first time. There was no tenderness here, no poetry. It was a collision. It was desperate, angry, and punishing. He bit her lower lip, drawing a drop of violet blood. She groaned into his mouth, tasting the copper, and slammed her hips against his. Noah lifted her, his hands gripping her thighs, pinning her to the tree. Kalia wrapped her legs around his waist, pulling him closer, needing to feel the weight of him, the reality of him. They tore at each other's clothes. Buttons snapped, fabric tore. The cool night air hit their skin, followed instantly by the searing heat of their bodies joining. This was not love-making. This was an exorcism. It was Kalia purging her fear and humiliation. It was Noah releasing the violence he held in check, channeling it into passion instead of death. Kalia bit his shoulder, right over the scar from the war. She raked her nails down his back. She demanded everything from him. She met his human endurance with her alien strength, a clash of biology that would have broken a lesser man. Noah didn't break. He matched her. He dominated her not with strength but with intensity. He held her gaze, forcing her to look at him, to acknowledge him. He wasn't a servant. He wasn't a construct. He was the man who was keeping her alive. When the climax came, it was a jagged, white-hot peak. Kalia cried out, a sound that was half pleasure, half fury, her psychic senses flooding with the sheer, overwhelming, protective rage pouring off him. They slumped against the tree, gasping, their skins slick with sweat and rain from the wet leaves. Noah rested his forehead against hers, his breathing ragged. Kalia's heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She kept her eyes closed, afraid to open them, afraid of what she would see. Slowly, Noah let her slide down until her boots touched the moss. He stepped back, adjusting his ruined clothes. He didn't say a word. He simply walked back to the fire, picked up a canteen, and drank. Kalia stood by the tree, wrapping her torn tunic around herself. She watched him. She felt raw, exposed. The anger was gone, replaced by a confusing, aching void. She had wanted him to be weak so she could despise him. She had wanted him to be a villain so she could hate him. He was neither. He was a tragedy, and she was falling in love with him. The realization terrified her more than the assassins. She walked back to the fire, moving stiffly. She sat on the opposite side of the pit. Noah passed her the canteen. She took it, their fingers brushing. The electricity was still there, humming under the surface. "We leave at dawn," Noah said. His voice was hoarse. "We need to get to the extraction point. If the drone found us, the hunter team isn't far behind." Kalia nodded, staring at the flames. "My father, does he expect me to survive?" "He hopes," Noah said, but he prepared for the alternative. "And you?" she asked, looking up at him. "Do you expect to survive?" Noah looked at her. The firelight danced in his dark eyes. "I am expendable, Kalia. You are the mission. As long as you breathe, I win." She wanted to tell him that was unacceptable. She wanted to tell him that she wouldn't let him die for her. But the words died in her throat, because the jungle went silent. It wasn't the gradual quiet of a predator passing through. It was an instant, terrified silence. The insects stopped humming. The night birds stopped calling. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Noah froze. He didn't look at the sensors. He looked at the darkness beyond the firelight. "Get to the shelter," he whispered. Kalia reached for her spear. "Noah, what is it?" "Move!" The command was a whip crack. Before Kalia could stand, the perimeter fence dissolved. It didn't explode. It simply hissed and melted, the metal posts liquefying under a stream of pressurized acid. From the darkness, a shape emerged. It was not the creature they had fought before. That had been a scout, a juvenile. This was the alpha. It stood 12 feet tall at the shoulder, a nightmare of chitin and muscle. It had 10 limbs, 6 for movement, 4 ending in serrated scythes. Its skin was not camouflaged, it was shifting, rippling like oil on water, refracting the light around it so that it appeared as a hole in the world. Its head was a cluster of sensory organs and a maw that dripped glowing, green saliva. Kalia's blood froze. A decimator. They were supposed to be extinct. Myths from the era of the first expansion. The beast stepped into the clearing. The ground shook with its weight. It ignored the fire. Its multiple eyes focused solely on Kalia. Noah was moving before the beast roared. He grabbed Kalia by the harness of her armor and threw her, literally threw her, toward the open airlock of the shelter. "Get inside, lock the door." Kalia scrambled in the mud, finding her footing. She looked back. Noah stood between her and the monster. He had no rifle. It was still disassembled on the cloth. He held only the entrenching tool and a combat knife. He looked impossibly small against the towering bulk of the decimator. "Noah!" she screamed. "Run!" Noah didn't run. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, silver injector. He jammed it into his neck. Kalia saw his body convulse. She saw the veins in his neck bulge, turning black. She saw his posture shift, the human fatigue vanishing, replaced by a rigid, vibrating tension. He was overriding the inhibitors. He was unlocking the cage. He turned his head slightly. His eyes were no longer human. They were dilated, black, void of recognition. "Seal the door, Kalia," he said. The voice was not his. It was a mechanical growl. The decimator shrieked, a sound that shattered the glass of the lantern and charged. Noah roared back, a sound of pure primal challenge, and sprinted to meet it. Kalia scrambled into the airlock. She hit the seal button just as the two forces collided. The last thing she saw before the heavy door hissed shut was Noah Reyes, the weak human husband, leaping into the air, his knife raised, diving straight into the acid-dripping maw of the apex predator. The door locked, the magnetic seals engaged, and then the world outside turned into the sound of tearing metal and wet. Biological ruin. Kalia sank to the floor, her hands pressed against the cold steel, listening to the man she loved tear himself apart to save her. The heavy magnetic locks of the shelter door engaged with a dull, final thud, sealing Princess Kalia inside the titanium box. The silence that followed was absolute for a single heartbeat, a vacuum of held breath. Then, the world outside erupted. Kalia scrambled to the small, reinforced viewport embedded in the center of the blast door. The glass was 4 inches thick, designed to withstand orbital bombardment, but it vibrated against her forehead as the shockwaves of the battle slammed against the hull. What she saw through the thick, layered glass defied every lesson she had ever learned about biology, warfare, and the hierarchy of predators. The decimator, the 10-limbed nightmare that had hunted the apex species of this world to near extinction, was screaming. It was not a scream of triumph. It was a shriek of confusion and pain. Noah was no longer the man who cooked her meals. He was no longer the soldier who had stood quietly while she insulted him. The injector he had jammed into his neck had done something terrifying to his physiology. He moved with a speed that blurred the air, a frantic, twitching velocity that the human frame should not have been capable of sustaining without shattering bone. He had lost the entrenching tool in the initial collision. He had dropped the knife seconds later, the blade snapping against the decimator's chitinous plating. He did not need them. Kalia watched, her breath fogging the glass, as Noah dodged a scything blow from one of the beast's primary claws. He didn't roll away. He moved into the arc, slipping inside the creature's guard. He leaped, latching onto the creature's thorax with his bare hands. His fingers, now rigid and hooked like talons dug into the soft flesh between the armor plates. He wasn't fighting with technique. He was fighting with a rabid mechanical fury. He tore a handful of wet, gray flesh from the creature's side. The decimator thrashed, slamming its bulk against the trees, trying to dislodge the parasite clinging to its chest. Noah held on. He climbed the beast, ignoring the acid that oozed from its pores, ignoring the crushing impacts as they smashed through the dense underbrush. He reached the creature's neck, a cluster of sensory nodes and thick, pulsing veins. The decimator's head snapped back, its jaws unhinged to bite him in half. Noah didn't flinch. He didn't dodge. He roared back at it, a sound that penetrated the hull of the shelter. It was a guttural, wet sound, devoid of language or humanity. He drove his thumbs into the creature's eyes. The beast convulsed, blinding acid spraying across Noah's face and chest. His skin blistered instantly, turning angry red and black, but he didn't stop. He used the leverage to swing himself onto the creature's back. He wrapped his arms around the thick, armored column of its throat, and he pulled. Kalia pressed her hands over her mouth. She could see the tendons in Noah's arms bulging, threatening to snap. She saw the black veins pulsing in his neck, standing out like ropes. He was applying thousands of pounds of pressure, his body locked in a rigor of absolute destruction. The decimator flailed, its legs churning the mud into a swamp, its screams rising in pitch until they became a high-frequency whine. Then, with a wet, sickening crack that Kalia felt in the soles of her feet, the creature's chitin gave way. Noah didn't let go. He ripped. He tore the throat out. He buried his face in the wound, his teeth, human, blunt, useless teeth, finding purchase on the exposed windpipe and severing it in a spray of neon-green arterial fluid. The beast fell. It collapsed like a demolished building, shaking the ground one last time before going still. Noah fell with it. He rolled off the carcass, landing in the muck. He didn't stand up in victory. He didn't check the perimeter. He lay there, twitching, his chest heaving so violently it looked like his ribs were broken. Kalia hit the release override on the door. The seals hissed and the door swung outward. The smell hit her instantly, copper, sulfur, and the stinging scent of the creature's acid blood. The humidity of the jungle wrapped around her like a wet shroud. "Noah!" She ran to him, her boots slipping in the gore. He was curled into a fetal ball, shivering uncontrollably. The black veins that had stood out on his neck were fading, receding back under his skin, leaving him pale and translucent. His tactical trousers were shredded. His chest was a map of chemical burns. She fell to her knees beside him, reaching out to touch his shoulder. "Don't," he rasped. The voice was weak, broken. He flinched away from her hand, scrambling backward in the mud like a cornered animal. "Don't touch me," he whispered, keeping his head down. "The inhibitor, it's not... I can't turn it off. Not yet." Kalia froze. She saw his hands. They were covered in the alien's blood, trembling so hard they blurred. He was looking at them with horror. He wasn't a soldier recovering from a fight. He was a man waking up from a possession. "You killed it," Kalia said softly. "I butchered it," he corrected, his voice cracking. "That wasn't me. That was the thing they put inside me. That was the weapon." He looked up at her then. His face was streaked with green blood and mud, his eyes red-rimmed and terrified. "I told you," he choked out. "I told you I was a monster." Kalia looked at the carcass of the decimator, a creature that could kill a squad of Imperial guards in seconds, reduced to meat by one unarmed human. She looked back at Noah. She saw the terror in his eyes. It wasn't fear of the jungle. It was fear that she would see him as an abomination, that she would look at him with the same disgust she had shown when they arrived. But she didn't feel disgusted. She felt a profound breaking sorrow, and beneath it, a fierce white-hot pride. He had unleashed his own personal hell to save her. He had become the thing he hated most because the alternative was letting her die. Kalia moved forward. She ignored his flinch. She reached out and grabbed his hands, the hands that had just torn a throat out, and held them tight. "Look at me, Noah." He shook his head, trying to pull away. "I'm dangerous. The adrenaline is still." "Look at me," she commanded, her voice ringing with royal authority. He froze, his eyes locking onto hers. "You are not a monster," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "A monster kills for pleasure. A monster kills for power. You killed to protect." "I lost control," he whispered. "No," she said, squeezing his hands until her own knuckles turned white. "You took control. You did what was necessary. I called you weak. I mocked you for holding back." She leaned in, disregarding the acid burns on his chest, disregarding the blood. She pressed her forehead against his. "I was blind," she whispered. "You were never weak. You were just caged. And I am so sorry I rattled the bars." Noah let out a shuddering breath. The tension in his body began to bleed away, leaving him limp. He leaned into her, his head dropping onto her shoulder. He began to weep, dry, silent sobs that shook his entire frame. Kalia held him in the mud, rocking him slowly while the jungle watched in silence. She stroked the back of his head, her fingers tangling in his wet hair, whispering promises in her native tongue that he could not understand, but the tone of which said everything. They stayed there for 20 minutes, until the shivering stopped and the night began to grow cold. "We cannot stay here," Noah said eventually, pulling back. He wiped his face with a relatively clean patch of his arm. "The smell of the kill. It will draw scavengers. And if the drone was transmitting, the recovery team will be tracking the thermal bloom of the fight." Kalia nodded. She helped him stand. He hissed in pain, clutching his side, but he stood. The soldier was back, wounded but functional. "We burn it," she said. Noah looked at the carcass. "We have to. If your people see how this thing died, if they see the bite marks, they'll know what I am. They'll know the Alliance violated the disarmament treaty by keeping me active." They piled the dry brush and the remaining supply crates around the massive body of the decimator. Noah used the last charge in the emergency flare gun to ignite the pyre. The fire roared to life, consuming the evidence of his savagery in a column of black smoke and orange flame. They packed what was left: a single medical kit, 2 days of rations, a Kalia's blade, Noah's broken shock pistol, which he kept out of habit more than utility. "Where do we go?" Kalia asked, adjusting the straps of the rucksack she had insisted on carrying. "The extraction point is 40 miles south," Noah said, checking his wrist compass. "But we can't use the shuttle. It will be rigged." "Then where?" "The capital," Kalia said, staring into the fire. "We go to the heart of the lie. If my cousin is behind this, he will be at the summit. I need to stand before the High Council and show them the truth." "It's a suicide run," Noah said. Kalia looked at him. Her eyes were hard, glittering with a new resolve. "Then we die together." "But we do not die running." Noah looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. A small, grim smile touched his lips. "To the capital, then." They moved into the jungle. The journey was a blur of pain and exhaustion. The terrain of Virelonfort fought them every step of the way. Vines thick as pythons snagged their boots. The humidity was a physical weight, pressing down on their lungs. Noah took point, despite his injuries. He moved with a limp, favoring his left leg, but his eyes never stopped scanning the tree line. He was back in his element, not the diplomat's husband, but the point man of a ghost unit. Kalia followed in his wake. She watched him differently now. She saw the way he stepped on the roots, not between them, to avoid noise. She saw the way he paused every few hundred yards to scent the air. The softness she had despised was gone, revealed to be a mask for a lethal competence. They had been walking for 6 hours when the trap sprung. It was not a primitive pit or a snare. It was a monofilament energy web, strung between 2 trees across a game trail. It was invisible to the naked eye, and even Noah's enhanced senses missed the faint hum of the generator buried in the loam. Kalia triggered the sensor. There was a high-pitched whine, and a web of blue laser light snapped into existence around her. "Kalia!" Noah shouted, spinning around. He was too late. The web contracted. It wasn't designed to kill, it was designed to capture. The lasers sliced through the greaves of her armor and bit into the flesh of her right calf and thigh. Kalia screamed as the energy cauterized the muscle instantly. The pain was blinding, a white-hot shock that short-circuited her nervous system. She fell, tangling further in the web. Noah lunged. He didn't try to pull her out. That would shred her. He dove for the generator unit at the base of the tree. He smashed it with a rock, shattering the casing and ripping out the power core with his bare fingers. The web vanished. Kalia lay on the moss, gasping, her leg a ruin of burnt armor and scorched flesh. She tried to move it, but the limb refused to obey. The muscle was cooked. Noah was over her in a second. He applied a numbing spray from the kit, his face pale and tight. "Can you stand?" he asked. Kalia grit her teeth and tried to push herself up. Pain shot up her spine, blacking out her vision for a second. She collapsed back with a groan. "No," she whispered. "The tendon. It is gone." Noah cursed softly. He looked at the map on his wrist, then at the sky. The sun was setting. The temperature was dropping. "We are still 10 miles from the cave system," he said. "If we stay here, the scavengers will smell the cooked meat." He didn't ask for permission. He didn't discuss options. He turned his back to her and knelt. "Get on." "Noah, you are wounded," Kalia protested, her voice weak. "You cannot carry me 10 miles. "I can carry you 100, he said. "Get on." She dragged herself onto his back. He grunted as he took her weight, his knees trembling for a second before he locked them. He stood up. Kalia wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face in the crook of his shoulder. He smelled of sweat, smoke, and old blood. It was the most comforting scent she had ever known. They walked. The miles blurred into a haze of endurance. Kalia drifted in and out of consciousness, the pain in her leg radiating in dull, throbbing waves. Every time she woke, Noah was still moving. His breathing was a ragged rhythm, a machine forcing itself to function past the point of failure. She could feel the heat of his body burning through his clothes. His fever was returning. "Put me down," she whispered at one point. "Save yourself." Noah didn't answer. He just adjusted his grip on her legs and kept walking. By the time they reached the cave, night had fully fallen. The cave was a fissure in a granite cliff face, hidden behind a curtain of waterfall. It was damp, but defensible. Noah carried her inside and set her down gently on a bed of dry moss. He didn't collapse. He checked the entrance, set a rudimentary alarm with dry branches, and then, only then, did he slide down the wall to sit opposite her. He looked like death. His skin was gray, his eyes were sunken, the burns on his chest were weeping clear fluid. Kalia dragged herself upright. She ignored the pain in her leg. She crawled across the small space until she was beside him. "Let me see," she said, reaching for the med kit. She tended to his wounds as best she could. She cleaned the burns, applied the last of the biogel. She stripped the tattered remains of his shirt off him. When she touched the old scars on his back, the ports where the Alliance had plugged him into their war machine, Noah shuddered. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why did you not leave me?" Noah looked at her. Because that is the mission. Kaelia shook her head. No, the mission is over. The treaty is broken. You owe me nothing. I owe you everything, he said. He reached out and touched her face. His hand was shaking, but his touch was gentle. Before I met you, I was just waiting to die. Kaelia, I was a ghost haunting my own life. You made me want to be real again. Kaelia felt tears prick her eyes. She leaned into his hand. I do not want to go back, she confessed, the words tumbling out in a rush. I do not want to be the Empress. I do not want the court, or the politics, or the lies. If going back means I have to watch you bow to me, if it means we are separated, then I would rather stay in this cave. I would rather die in this jungle with you than rule the galaxy without you. Noah went still. He looked at her with a desperate, longing hunger. You don't mean that. I do. They won't let us be together, Kaelia. Even if we survive, the Empire will not accept a human consort. And the Alliance? They will want their weapon back. If I return to Earth, they will decommission me. They will wipe my memory to protect the secrets of the program. Kaelia gripped his shoulders. Then we make them accept us, or we burn it all down. She kissed him. It started slow. It was not the angry collision of the night before. It was a surrender. It was an acknowledgement that they were two broken things that fit together perfectly. Noah groaned, a low sound of defeat and desire. He pulled her closer, mindful of her injured leg. When they came together this time, it was aching. It was slow. Every touch was a reverence. Kaelia, who had been raised to command, to dominate, to lead, finally let go. She allowed herself to be small. She allowed herself to be held. She lay back on the moss, looking up at the shadows dancing on the cave ceiling, feeling the weight of him on top of her. It wasn't a crushing weight. It was an anchor. He moved with a tenderness that belied the violence he was capable of. He kissed the hollow of her throat, the line of her jaw, the scar on her shoulder. He worshipped her body with a focus that made her feel like the only star in the sky. Kaelia felt the psychic bond open again. This time, there was no rage. There was only a vast ocean-deep sorrow, and a love so intense it terrified her. She felt his fear, not of death, but of losing this moment. He was memorizing her. He was imprinting her onto his soul because he truly believed this was the last time. Noah, she whispered, her mind merging with his. Stay with me, he thought back, his mental voice clear and resonant. Just stay with me. She wrapped her legs around him as best she could, pulling him deeper. She wanted to fuse with him. She wanted to erase the line where the alien princess ended and the human soldier began. They moved together in the dark, finding a rhythm that was older than empires and species. It was the rhythm of survival. When the end came, it was a quiet, shuddering release that left them both gasping, clinging to each other as if the gravity of the planet had suddenly ceased to exist. Kaelia fell asleep in his arms, her head on his chest, listening to the slow, steady beat of his heart. Noah did not sleep. He lay awake, stroking her hair, staring at the cave entrance. His hand rested on the hilt of the knife. He knew the morning would bring blood. He knew the hunters were closing in. But for tonight, he held the universe in his arms. And for the first time since he was a child, the voices of his programming were silent. The trek to the Yashari outpost was a grueling march through the dying edge of the jungle, where the dense vegetation gave way to the scorched, acidic plains that bordered the civilized zones. Outpost 9 was a jagged silhouette against the crimson horizon, a fortress of obsidian metal and shield generators designed to monitor the frontier. To Princess Kaelia, it looked like salvation. To Commander Noah Reyes, it looked like a choke point. They approached the perimeter gate just as the twin suns began to dip below the mountains. Kalia leaned heavily on Noah, her injured leg dragging through the gray dust. She was feverish, her golden eyes glassy, but she held her chin high. Even in rags and covered in mud, she refused to look like a refugee. She was the heir to the throne, and she would enter her garrison with dignity. The perimeter sensors swept over them, bathing them in red light. "Identify," a mechanical voice boomed from the guard towers. "Princess Kalia of the High Blood," Kalia announced, her voice raspy but commanding, requesting immediate medical extraction and secure comms to the capital. There was a pause that lasted 10 seconds too long. Noah shifted his weight, his hand drifting toward the hilt of the knife concealed at his belt. He felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. The rhythm of the outpost was wrong. There were no patrol drones. The silence was heavy, expectant. The massive blast doors groaned open. A squad of Yashari soldiers marched out. They wore the black and silver armor of the Imperial Guard, their faces hidden behind sleek, sensory deprivation helmets. At their lead was a captain with the crest of a noble house etched into his breastplate. Captain Vax. Kalia breathed, relief washing over her face. She recognized him. He had served in her father's personal detail. Vax removed his helmet. His face was sharp, pale violet and utterly expressionless. He looked at Kalia, then at Noah. "We received word of your shuttle crash, Highness," Vax said. His voice was smooth, too polished for a frontier commander. "We feared the worst." "We were sabotaged," Kalia said, stepping forward. "We need transport. There is a traitor in the court." Vax nodded slowly. "Yes, we know." He raised his hand. The soldiers did not salute. They raised their plasma rifles. Noah moved before the first shot was fired. He shoved Kalia behind the thick plating of a hydraulic piston just as the air filled with the screech of ionized energy. "Ambush," Noah roared, grabbing Kalia and dragging her toward the cover of a supply crate. Vax didn't shout orders. He simply watched as his men advanced. "Take the female alive. Humans are irrelevant. Kill it." Kalia stared at Vax in shock. "You serve my father." "I serve the future," Vax shouted back, his voice echoing off the metal walls. "And the future has no place for half-breed alliances." Noah popped up, throwing a rock to draw fire, then sprinting to the next cover. He had no gun. He had a knife and a body that was running on fumes and adrenaline. He tackled the nearest soldier, driving the blade into the gap between the neck armor and the helmet. The soldier gurgled and fell. Noah grabbed the fallen rifle, rolling onto his back and firing 3 precise shots. 2 soldiers dropped, but there were 20 of them. A concussion grenade landed at Noah's feet. He had a split second to choose, dive away and save himself or shield Kalia. He threw himself over her. The world turned white. The blast wave slammed into Noah's back like a sledgehammer, cracking his armor and the ribs beneath. The sonic pulse scrambled his equilibrium, turning his inner ear into a chaotic mess. He vomited, his vision graying out. Bootsteps approached, heavy, deliberate. Kalia was screaming his name, but it sounded like she was underwater. He felt rough hands grab him. He tried to fight, but his limbs were lead. He saw a soldier strike Kalia with the butt of a rifle, knocking her unconscious. "No," Noah groaned, reaching for her. A boot stomped onto his outstretched hand, crushing the fingers. Vax stood over him. The captain looked down with a sneer of absolute disgust. "Pathetic creature," Vax said. He pressed the barrel of his sidearm to Noah's temple and pulled the trigger on the stun setting. Darkness swallowed him whole. Waking up was not a gradual return to consciousness. It was a violent collision with pain. Noah gasped, his body arching against the restraints. He was in a room that smelled of antiseptic and burnt ozone. He was stripped to his waist, strapped upright to a metal interrogation frame. His arms were stretched above his head, the muscles screaming. A Yshari interrogator stood before him. He was a specialist, wearing a surgical apron over his uniform. He held a neural agitator, a wand that stimulated the pain centers of the brain directly, bypassing the body's physical limits. "Where is the data drive?" the interrogator asked calmly. Noah spat a mouthful of blood onto the floor. "I don't know what you're talking about." The interrogator touched the wand to Noah's chest. White-hot lightning tore through Noah's nervous system. It felt like every bone in his body was breaking simultaneously. He screamed, a raw, animal sound that scraped his throat raw. The pain stopped as quickly as it started, leaving him gasping, sweat pouring off his shivering skin. "The princess had a drive," the interrogator said, cleaning the wand with a cloth. "It contains evidence." "Where did she hide it?" Noah let his head hang forward. His mind was racing, calculating. They hadn't killed him yet because they thought he knew where the evidence was. That meant Kalia didn't have it on her when they searched her. She must have dropped it or hidden it during the ambush. Or maybe they just enjoyed this. "Go to hell," Noah whispered. The interrogator sighed. "You humans, so much bravado for such fragile vessels." He stepped closer. "We have the princess in the stasis lab. She is frozen in a cryo tube. She feels nothing. But you will feel everything. And when you break, and you will break, we will thaw her out and let you watch her die." The door to the cell hissed open. A guard stepped in. He was young, his armor scuffed. He held a data pad. "Leave us," the guard said. "Commander Vax demands a status report on the prisoner's vitals." The interrogator frowned. "I am in the middle of a session." "Vax is impatient. Go." The interrogator glared at the guard but holstered the wand. "Do not let him die," he warned. He walked out, the door sealing behind him. The guard stood there for a moment, listening to the hum of the ventilation fans. Then he turned to Noah. He didn't look angry. He looked ashamed. Noah watched him through swollen eyes. "Get on with it." The guard reached for the console on the wall, but instead of increasing the voltage, he typed in a command sequence. The magnetic cuffs around Noah's wrists clicked and hissed, releasing him. Noah slumped forward, catching himself on his knees before he hit the floor. He looked up, confused. "What are you doing?" "My name is Kael'thas," the guard said quietly. "I signed up to defend the Empire, not to butcher royalty for a coup." Noah struggled to his feet, bracing himself against the frame. His body was a wreck, but the pain was focusing him. "Who is paying you?" "Prince Vorian." Kael'thas spat the name like a curse. Kalia's cousin. He orchestrated the marriage. He hired the mercenaries on Virelon-4. He convinced the High Council that Kalia was plotting to sell our technology to the humans. Vorian. Noah memorized the name. He flexed his crushed fingers, ignoring the agony. "Where is she?" "Level 3. Sub-basement. Cryo-storage. They are prepping her for transport to the capital. They plan to display her body as proof of her treasonous death in the wilds." Noah grabbed the guard by the collar of his armor. He was 6 inches shorter and 50 pounds lighter, but the intensity in his eyes made the Yshari flinch. "Get me a weapon." Kael'thas hesitated, then unholstered his sidearm, a heavy plasma repeater, and handed it to Noah. "There is a corvette on the landing pad, the Void Runner. It is fueled and prepped for Vax's departure. If you can get her to the hangar, you can escape." "Why are you helping me?" Noah asked, checking the charge on the weapon. "Because I saw the footage from the jungle," Kael'thas said. "I saw what you did to that decimator. You fought for her when her own kin paid to have her killed. That makes you more Yshari than Vax will ever be." Noah nodded once. "Thank you." Kael'thas opened the cell door. "Go." I will trigger the fire alarm in the barracks to draw the guards away from the lab. You have 5 minutes. Noah didn't waste them. He moved through the corridors like a wraith. His bare feet made no sound on the metal grating. The pain in his body was a distant signal, suppressed by the cold, hard clarity of his objective. Level 3 was cold. The air was pumped full of liquid nitrogen to keep the stasis units stable. Noah shivered, the sweat on his skin turning to ice, but he kept the plasma repeater raised. 2 technicians were monitoring the wall of blue-lit tubes. They never heard him. Noah stepped up behind them and pistol-whipped the first one into unconsciousness. The second spun around, reaching for an alarm. Noah slammed him into the console, driving his knee into the alien's stomach, silencing him. He scanned the tubes. There she was. Princess Kalia floated in a cylinder of blue gel. Her eyes were closed, her hair floating like a halo around her head. She looked peaceful, like a sleeping statue carved from amethyst. But the readout on the console showed her heart rate was dangerously slow. Stasis sickness was setting in. Noah typed frantically on the keypad, bypassing the safety protocols. Purge sequence initiated. The fluid drained with a loud gurgle. The glass hissed and slid open. Kalia slumped forward, coughing up the oxygenated liquid. Noah caught her. She was freezing, her skin like marble. "Kalia," he whispered, chafing her arms to generate heat. "Breathe." She gasped, her eyes fluttering open. They were unfocused, the pupils blowing wide. "Noah," she croaked. "I've got you," he said, pulling her wet, shivering body against his bare chest. "I've got you." She looked around, panic rising in her chest. "Vax, the soldiers." "We're leaving," Noah said. He helped her stand. Her legs were wobbly, the stasis having sapped her strength, but the adrenaline was starting to kick in. He took off the surgical apron the interrogator had left on the table and wrapped it around her shoulders. "Stay with me," he whispered, gripping her face with his hands. "I am not letting them take you, not today, not ever." Kalia nodded, her teeth chattering. Give me a weapon." He handed her a vibro blade he had taken from one of the technicians. It wasn't her ceremonial sword, but it was sharp. The alarms began to blare. Kael'thas had done his job, but Vax wasn't stupid. He would know the prisoner was loose. "To the hangar," Noah commanded. They ran. The corridors were a blur of flashing red lights and wailing sirens. They encountered the first resistance near the turbo lift. 3 guards rounded the corner. Noah didn't stop. He fired the repeater from the hip, the blue bolts of energy punching through the chest plates of the front 2 guards. The third returned fire, the plasma scoring the wall inches from Kalia's head. Kalia didn't flinch. She threw herself into a slide, passing under the guard's aim, and hamstrung him with the vibroblade. As he fell, she silenced him with a thrust to the throat. She stood up, wiping the blade on the guard's cloak. Her movements were stiff, but her lethal muscle memory was intact. Noah looked at her. "Nice cut." "Move," she said. They reached the hangar bay. The Void Runner sat on the pad, a sleek, predatory vessel shaped like a dagger. The ramp was down, but Vax was waiting. He stood at the base of the ramp with 6 heavy troopers. He held a heavy energy cannon. "I underestimated you, human," Vax shouted over the sound of the engines. "I will not make that mistake again." He opened fire. Noah tackled Kalia behind a fuel canister as the cannon fire chewed up the deck plating. The heat was intense. "Suppressive fire," Noah yelled. "Keep their heads down." He didn't wait for her to acknowledge. He rolled out from cover, firing the repeater on full auto. It was a distraction. He wasn't aiming to kill, he was aiming to make them flinch. Kalia understood. While Noah drew their fire, she sprinted to the left, using the landing struts of the ship as cover. She flanked them. She appeared behind the line of troopers like a vengeful spirit. She didn't shout. She just killed. She took down 2 soldiers before they even knew she was there. Vax spun around, swinging the heavy cannon. Noah saw the opening. He dropped the empty repeater and sprinted. It was 50 feet of open ground, a suicide run. Vax saw him coming and tried to bring the cannon to bear, but the weapon was heavy, cumbersome. Noah didn't slow down. He launched himself into the air, colliding with Vax in a tackle that knocked the wind out of both of them. They hit the deck hard. The cannon skittered away. Vax was stronger. He was a Yshari elite, 7 feet of armored muscle. He threw Noah off him like a rag doll. Noah slammed into the landing strut, his vision swimming. Vax drew a serrated combat knife. "You die now, mongrel." He lunged. Noah didn't try to block the stronger alien. He used Vax's momentum against him. He dropped to one knee, twisting his body, and drove his own knife upward into the soft seal under Vax's armpit. It was a lucky strike, a desperate strike. The blade pierced the heart. Vax gasped, his eyes going wide. He looked down at the human who had just killed him. "Impossible," he gurgled. Noah shoved the dying captain away. "Get to the ship!" he screamed at Kalia. The remaining troopers were disorganized, their leader dead. Kalia covered Noah as he scrambled up the ramp. She followed him, sealing the airlock just as plasma fire began to ping harmlessly against the hull. Noah threw himself into the pilot's seat. His hands flew across the alien controls. He didn't know the language fluently, but flight systems were universal. Throttle, shields, nav computer. "Buckle up," he yelled. The Void Runner surged forward, its engines screaming. They blasted out of the hangar bay, shattering the atmospheric containment field. Fighters were launching from the outpost's upper towers. Noah didn't engage. He pushed the throttle to 110%. The G-force slammed them back into their seats. "Calculating jump vector," the ship's computer announced. "Do it," Kalia shouted. "Just get us out of here." Noah punched the drive activation. The stars outside the viewport stretched into lines of infinite white light. The ship shuddered, then slipped into the quiet velvet dimension of hyperspace. They were safe. Noah slumped in the pilot's chair. The adrenaline crash was hitting him hard this time. His hands were trembling uncontrollably. He checked the proximity sensors. No pursuit. He turned the chair around. Kaelia was sitting in the co-pilot station. She had pulled the surgical apron tight around herself. She was staring at him. "We made it," she whispered. Noah nodded. He couldn't speak. His throat was too dry. He stood up shakily and went to the medical synthesizer on the wall. He mixed a nutrient stim and downed it, then brought one to her. Kaelia took it, her fingers brushing his. "Vorian," she said, testing the name. "My own blood." "Power makes people crazy," Noah rasped. "It makes them forget who they are." He sat on the floor beside her chair, too exhausted to move to the quarters. Kaelia slid down to sit with him. She rested her head on his shoulder. "Rest," Noah said. "It's a 3-day jump to the capital. You need to heal." Kaelia closed her eyes. She didn't think she could sleep, but the hum of the hyperdrive was a hypnotic lullaby. She drifted off. The dream came quickly. She was walking through the crypts of the ancestors beneath the imperial palace. The stone sarcophagi of the old emperors lined the walls. It was dark, cold, and silent. At the end of the hall, her father stood. He was wearing his coronation robes, but they were tattered, stained with black oil. He looked old, frail. "Father," she called out. He turned to her. His eyes were milky white, blind. "Do not trust the council," he whispered. His voice sounded like dry leaves skittering on stone. "The rot is deep. Kaelia, Vorian is but a hand. The head is hidden." "Who?" she asked, running toward him. "Who is doing this?" He began to fade, turning into smoke. "Verantal," he whispered. Find Verantal. Kalia woke up with a gasp. She sat up, her heart racing. The cockpit was dim, lit only by the soft blue glow of the instrument panels. Noah was awake. He was sitting opposite her, cleaning his knife. He looked up instantly. Nightmare? He asked softly. A vision, she said, rubbing her temples. My father. He spoke to me. What did he say? He gave me a name, Verantal. Noah frowned. He ran the name through his mental database of Alliance intelligence. Nothing. It sounds ancient, he said. It is. Kalia nodded. It is a name from the forbidden histories. I do not know if it is a person or a place, but he said Vorian is just a puppet. Verantal is the master. She shivered. The fear was creeping back in. They were flying into a trap nested inside a conspiracy. Noah saw the fear. He put down the knife and took her face in his hands. Kalia, look at me. She met his gaze. We have a ship. We have the truth. And we have each other. Vorian thinks you are dead. He thinks I am dead. That gives us the greatest weapon in war. Surprise. He leaned in and kissed her forehead. It was a chaste, gentle kiss, a promise sealed in blood and survival. We will find this Verantal. We will expose Vorian, and we will take back your throne. How can you be so sure? She whispered. Noah smiled. It was a dangerous wolf's smile. Because I've already died once on this trip. Princess, I'm not planning on doing it again. We'll end this. Kalia looked at him, the scarred, battered human who had torn a monster apart for her, and she believed him. She leaned her head back against the bulkhead and watched the stars streak by, ready for war. The capital city of the Yashari Empire, Ethelgard, was a sprawling testament to a civilization that had mastered the stars but never quite tamed its own savage heart. Crystalline spires pierced the violet stratosphere, tethered by suspended gravity rails that glittered like spiderwebs in the twilight. It was a city of light, power, and absolute order. Or at least, it pretended to be. The Void Runner, the corvette stolen from the frontier outpost, dropped out of hyperspace on the ragged edge of the system's perimeter. Commander Noah Reyes sat in the pilot's seat, his hands moving across the stolen authorization codes with the grim efficiency of a man defusing a bomb. Beside him, Princess Kalia stared at the holographic projection of the royal palace. Her face was pale, cleaned of the mud but not the exhaustion, yet her eyes burned with the cold fire of a star going supernova. They are broadcasting the summit live, Noah said, his voice rough. He tapped the console, bringing up the audio feed. The voice of Prince Vorian, Kalia's cousin, filled the cockpit. It was smooth, mourning, and perfectly rehearsed. In a tragedy that strikes at the very heart of our bloodline. Princess Kalia was a beacon of hope, a bridge to the new era. To lose her to the savage wilds of Virulonfort and to the incompetence of her human guardians is a wound that will never fully heal. Kalia gripped the armrests of her chair until the leather creaked. He is eulogizing me while I am still breathing. He thinks you are Ash, Noah reminded her. He thinks Vax did his job. Noah adjusted the shields, routing power from the engines to the forward deflectors. We have one shot at this. Kalia. The summit is taking place in the Hall of Ascendancy. The anti-air defenses are automated, but if I fly low and fast, mimicking a returning patrol vector, I can get us to the landing terrace before they realize we are not on the schedule. And then, Kalia asked. And then we walk in the front door, Noah said. He looked at her, and for a fleeting second, the hard mask of the soldier slipped. Are you ready to start a war? Kalia stood up. She reached for the ceremonial vibroblade she had taken from the outpost. She strapped it to her hip, right over the tattered remains of her diplomatic gown. I am not starting a war. Noah, I am finishing one. Noah punched the throttle. The Void Runner screamed toward the planet's surface, burning through the atmosphere like a falling meteor. The Hall of Ascendancy was a cavernous chamber of obsidian and gold, large enough to house a starship. 2,000 dignitaries from the high houses stood in tiered rows, their robes shimmering in the light of the floating chandeliers. At the far end, upon the dais of kings, sat Emperor Valerius. He looked diminished, a lion whose mane had turned gray. His breathing labored as he listened to his nephew speak. Prince Vorian stood at the podium, wearing the white mourning sash over his armor. He looked every inch the grieving future emperor. "We must not let her death be in vain," Vorian announced, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "We must look to the stability of the empire. The human alliance has proven fragile, dangerous. It is time we reconsider our borders. It is time we—" The boom was louder than thunder. It shook the foundations of the palace. Dust rained down from the ceiling as the massive blast doors at the entrance of the hall were not opened, but blown off their hinges. The explosion silenced the room instantly. 2,000 heads turned. Through the smoke and the twisted metal, 2 figures emerged. They did not look like diplomats. They looked like wraiths dredged up from a battlefield. Kalia walked in the lead, her steps heavy but steady, her clothes torn, her skin marked with the healing burns of the jungle. Beside her walked the human, Noah Reyes. He moved with a predatory gait, his eyes scanning the room, his hand resting on the heavy plasma repeater slung across his chest. A collective gasp swept through the hall. Vorian froze at the podium, his face drained of color, turning a sickly shade of gray. "Kalia," the Emperor whispered, gripping the arms of his throne. Kalia marched down the central aisle. The Imperial Guards, confused and hesitant, lowered their halberds but did not attack. They recognized the blood. They recognized the air. "I apologize for the interruption. Cousin," Kalia projected her voice, cutting through the silence like a blade. "But I found your eulogy lacking in accuracy." Vorian recovered his wits. He pointed a shaking finger at her. "Imposter! It is a trick, a human hologram. Seize them!" The guard stepped forward, uncertain. "Stand down!" Noah roared. The sound was not human. It carried the mechanical distortion of a man who had pushed his vocal cords past the breaking point. He stepped in front of Kalia, leveling the plasma repeater not at the guards, but at the ceiling. He fired a warning burst that shattered a chandelier, sending crystal raining down between them and the soldiers. The shock of the violence held the room in check. Kalia stepped around Noah, continuing her advance until she stood at the base of the dais, looking up at her father. "I am no ghost, father, and I am no victim of the wilds." Valerius looked down at her, tears welling in his milky eyes. "You are alive." "I am," Kalia said, "but not by the grace of this court." She turned to face the assembly, her back to the throne. She pulled a data node from her belt, the one she had salvaged from the Void Runner's comms logs. "Prince Vorian claims I died due to human incompetence," she announced, her voice ringing with cold fury. "He claims the Alliance is a failure, but the only failure here is his inability to hire competent assassins." She threw the data node onto the floor. It activated, projecting a massive 3-dimensional hologram into the air above the crowd. The footage was grainy, taken from Noah's tactical helmet recorder during the fight in the jungle. It showed the decimator attack. But then, it shifted. It showed the logs from the surveillance drone Kalia had found. It played the audio recording of Captain Vax at the outpost. "I serve the future," Vax's voice boomed through the hall, "and the future has no place for half-breed alliances." The crowd murmured. This was treason. This was a military coup. Kalia gestured to the hologram. "My cousin, Prince Vorian, paid Captain Vax to sabotage our shuttle. He paid to have me hunted like an animal on Virulent 4. He orchestrated my death to clear his path to the throne. Lies! Vorian screamed, his composure shattering. He descended from the podium, his hand going to the energy saber at his belt. She has been corrupted. The human has brainwashed her. Look at her. She stands with a monster. The room was split. Some nobles looked at Kalia with awe, seeing the survivor of the trials. Others looked at Noah with disgust, seeing a dangerous alien element in their sacred hall. He is a butcher, Vorian shouted, playing to the xenophobia of the court. Look at him. He is a bioweapon. He killed Vax. He killed loyal Yashari soldiers. Will you let this beast stand in the presence of the Emperor? The tension in the room was a physical weight. The guards gripped their weapons, looking from Vorian to the Emperor, waiting for a command. Noah stepped forward. He handed his rifle to Kalia. He stood unarmed before the court, his scarred chest visible through the tears in his tactical shirt. I am a weapon, Noah said, his voice calm, carrying to the back of the room. I was built for war. I was built to kill. He looked directly at Vorian. But I did not kill your soldiers for sport, Prince. I killed them because they stood between me and my wife. I killed them because they were traitors to the crown they swore to protect. Vorian snarled. He realized he was losing. The narrative was slipping away from him. The Emperor was looking at him with a dawning horror. If you are so strong, human, Vorian hissed, then die like a soldier. Vorian moved with a speed that caught the room off guard. He didn't draw his saber. He drew a hidden disruptor pistol from his sleeve, a weapon illegal within the palace walls. He aimed at Kalia. Noah did not hesitate. He did not think. The programming that he had fought for so long, the instincts he had suppressed, took over. But this time, they were not guided by rage. They were guided by love. He stepped in front of Kalia. Vorian pulled the trigger. The disruptor beam hit Noah in the center of his chest. The sound was a wet, sizzling crack. The force of the impact lifted Noah off his feet and threw him backward. He slammed into the stone steps of the dais, sliding down to Kalia's feet. Noah! Kalia screamed, dropping to her knees. The room gasped. The Emperor stood up. Vorian laughed. A manic, breathless sound. See? Fragile. Just meat. Kalia pressed her hands over the wound in Noah's chest. It was a blackened, smoking crater. His heart had stopped. She felt the silence in her mind. The psychic bond had snapped shut. No, she whispered, panic clawing at her throat. No, you promised. You promised we would end this. Vorian walked toward them, the gun still raised. Now, cousin, let us finish this tragedy. He aimed at Kalia's head. Then, a hand grabbed his ankle. Vorian looked down. Noah's eyes were open. They were not the eyes of a dead man. They were black, the pupils dilated to encompass the entire iris. The veins in his neck were pulsing with a dark, thick sludge. The genetic modifications that the Earth Alliance had buried in his DNA, the fail-safes designed to keep a billion-dollar weapon from being scrapped by a single lucky shot, had been engaged. His adrenal system was flooding his body with a synthetic compound that bridged the neural gap. His cells were knitting together at a visible rate. Noah sat up, smoke curled from his chest. Vorian scrambled back, terror seizing him. What are you? Noah stood. He swayed slightly, then locked his knees. He looked at the hole in his chest, then at Vorian. Hard to kill, Noah rasped. The court erupted. This was impossible. No biological being survived a disruptor blast to the heart. Kalia looked up at him, tears streaming down her face, but triumph blazing in her eyes. She stood up beside him. She turned to the crowd. Do you see? She demanded. My cousin strikes with shadows and hidden guns. My husband takes the fire and remains standing. Who is the weak one? Who is the fit ruler? She pointed at Vorian. And I have one more truth for you. She tapped the data node again. A new list of files scrolled through the hologram. These were bank transfers, galactic credit routing numbers. Vorion didn't just use Imperial soldiers, Kalia declared. He hired the Sons of Malice to ensure the job was done. The silence in the room was absolute. The Sons of Malice were not just mercenaries. They were enemies of the state, pirates who had raided Yushari border worlds for a decade. You paid our enemies with Imperial tax credits, Kalia accused, her voice deadly quiet. You funded the very monsters who burned our colonies. The Emperor's face twisted in rage. He pointed a trembling hand at his nephew. Treason, Valerius croaked. High treason. The Imperial Guard did not hesitate this time. They descended on Vorion. The prince tried to raise his gun again, but a halberd swept his legs out from under him. He was pinned to the floor, screaming, stripped of his dignity and his rank in seconds. Take him to the black cells, the Emperor commanded. As Vorion was dragged away, screaming curses at the sky, the Emperor collapsed back onto his throne, exhausted. He looked at Kalia. He looked at the blood on her floor, the fire in her eyes. Come to me, my daughter, he whispered. Kalia climbed the steps. She knelt before him. I am here, father. Valerius placed his hand on her head. The succession is secure. You have passed the trial of fire. I reinstate you as crown princess and heir apparent. He looked past her, at the human standing at the base of the steps. Noah was holding his chest, his breathing shallow, but he stood at attention. And the humans, Valerius asked, what is his place? Kalia stood up. She looked down at Noah. She saw the man who had cooked her food, who had recited poetry in a storm, who had torn a beast apart with his hands, and who had just taken a bullet for her. He is not a political tool. Father, Kalia said firmly, he is not a treaty obligation. She walked down the steps until she stood before Noah. She took his bloodied hand in hers and raised it high. He is my consort, she declared to the silent room. He is a noble of the High House, and anyone who wishes to challenge his standing must answer to me. And to me, Noah added, his voice low but carrying the weight of a threat. The court bowed. It was a ripple of silver and gold cloth, a submission to the new power that had risen from the ashes of the frontier. The royal gardens were quiet. The night air was cool, scented with the night-blooming jasmine that only grew in the Emperor's private sanctuary. The chaos of the summit felt a lifetime away, though it had only been 6 hours. Noah sat on a stone bench overlooking the fountains. He was shirtless, his chest wrapped in layers of regenerative bandages. The Yushari medical drones had done their work, accelerating his own healing factor. But he was still sore. He felt like he had been kicked by a mule. Kalia walked out from the shadows of the colonnade. She had bathed and changed into a simple silk robe, stripping away the armor and the grime. She looked softer now, ethereal in the moonlight. But Noah knew better. He knew the steel underneath. You should be resting, she said, sitting beside him. The doctors said your heart stopped for 8 seconds. I've had worse. Noah shrugged, then winced. Okay, maybe not worse, but close. Kalia ran her hand gently over the bandages on his chest. Vorion is in the deep cells, she said softly. He has confessed to everything. The network is being dismantled. And the name? Noah asked. Varental? Kalia frowned, looking up at the stars. He claims he does not know it. He says he was contacted by a broker, a voice in the dark. The name came from my dream. Noah. It is a warning of something older, something yet to come. Noah nodded. Then we will be ready for it. He leaned back, looking at the alien constellations. It was strange. He was light years from Earth, sitting in a palace surrounded by people who had looked at him like a lab rat only hours ago. But he didn't feel out of place. He felt grounded. Kalia turned to him. She studied his profile in the moonlight. "I owe you an apology," she said. Noah looked at her. "For what?" "For the beginning," she said. "For the way I looked at you, I was so arrogant. I measured strength by the thickness of armor and the size of muscles." She traced the line of his jaw. "I thought you were weak, remember? I told you that you were just soft meat wrapped in cloth." Noah laughed. It was a genuine sound, warm and raspy. "You thought I was weak," he echoed, grinning, "until I tore that damn thing apart in the jungle." Kalia stopped. Her hand rested on his cheek. She looked into his eyes, and he saw the psychic bond flare to life again, gold and warm and infinite. "No," she whispered. She leaned in, her lips brushing against his. "Until you tore me apart." Noah went still. He understood. It wasn't the violence that had won her. It wasn't the killing. It was the dismantling of her defenses. He had broken through the isolation she had built around herself to survive the court. He had forced her to feel, to need, to trust. He kissed her. It was a promise of a different kind of future. A future where they didn't have to hide. "We have a lot of work to do," Noah murmured against her lips. "The empire is fractured. The alliance is going to want answers. And there is still a shadow out there waiting for us." Kalia pulled back, smiling. Her eyes glowed with a fierce, happy light. "Let them come," she said. She stood up and pulled him to his feet. They walked to the edge of the balcony, looking out over the glittering city of Ethelgard. The wind caught Kalia's robe, making it snap like a flag. Noah stood beside her, his hand finding hers. They stood before the stars, an alien princess and a human soldier, two broken things that had forged something unbreakable in the fire. "Ready?" Noah asked. Kalia squeezed his hand. "Always,"